Hello everyone and welcome to our vlog on democracy and conflict. Today we will be answering the question, to what extent has coercion been effective in promoting peace and democracy in three different cases? The conflict between the Mexican government and the Zapatistas, between the UK government and North Ireland, and between the Turkish government and Tayyip Erdogan and the army factions. Coercion refers to the imposition of cost by a state on its opponent groups or non-state actors to prevent them from taking action. Deterrence, or to compel them to take action, competence. Coercion aims to influence the behavior of others through non-voluntary means. Democracy is defined by Sartori as a system of governance in which citizens hold rulers accountable for their actions in the public realm, acting indirectly through the competition and cooperation of their elected representative. Bukowski, on the other hand, defined it as a regime in which parties lose elections. Galton defines peace as the absence of direct violence between states, and we can talk about negative and positive peace. In our first case, the 1st of January of 1994, in Chiapas State, Mexico, a group of indigenous peasants, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, rebelled against the Mexican government demanding greater autonomy and control over their land and resources. The uprising was a response to the Mexican government's implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA, which significantly impacted the livelihood of indigenous communities in Chiapas. The Zapatistas argued that NAFTA would deepen exploitation and marginalize indigenous people in Mexico. In response to the Zapatista uprising, the Mexican government launched a series of peace talks with the rebels, which led to the signing of the San Andres Agreement in 1996. The agreement recognized the rights of indigenous people in Mexico and promised them greater autonomy and control over their land and resources. However, the Mexican government failed to fully implement the agreement, leading to renewed conflict and violence in Chiapas. The government's response to the Zapatista movement has often been characterized as coercive, with violence, arbitrary detentions, and the use of military force as a response. On December 22nd of 1997, the most significant incident of violence of the conflict took place in the small village of Acteal, in the highlands of Chiapas. Here, 45 unarmed men, women, and children were massacred by a paramilitary group linked to Mexico's ruling Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI. In this case, the use of coercion has not been effective in promoting peace and democracy in the conflict. The use of coercion has often led to further violence and human rights violations, making it more challenging to achieve a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Moving on to our second case, the conflict between the UK and Northern Ireland, also known as the Troubles, was a political and sectarian confrontation from 1968 to 1998, which origins can be traced back to 1167 when the Anglo-Norman intervened on Ireland and England first laid roots in the area. The conflict was primarily between the Protestant Unionist community, the Loyalists, who wanted to remain as a part of the United Kingdom, and the Catholic nationalist community, the Republicans, who wished Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. In addition, the Irish Republican Army, the IRI, and the British Army play a significant role in this conflict. Three moments are critical to understand this conflict. The first one in 1969, when the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland called Britain for help to restore order, which began an almost 3 decades-long occupation by British troops in Northern Ireland. Secondly, in 1971, the Operation Demetrius, also known as an internment without trial, occurred. They imprisoned over 2,000 Catholic nationalists on filthy charges of terrorism and held them in jails without trials. Many of them would die. And finally, in 1972, Bloody Sunday, where the Catholic nationalists, armed by the provincial IRI, organized a protest against the British policy of internment without trial. When the British Army was called to shut it down, the protesters refused to leave, and the army opened fire. Coercion in this conflict had democracy and promoted a negative peace. As Galton says, negative peace consists of the action of those three forms of violence: structural, direct, and cultural. On the other hand, positive peace includes mutually beneficial cooperation on an equal basis and a mutual learning to heal past violence and prevent future violence. Coercion undermines democracy in this way. First, the Northern Ireland Assembly, established in 1973, was suspended the next year due to the escalation of violence, and direct rule was imposed from London. The suspension of the Assembly meant that people in Northern Ireland were denied the right to participate in democratic decision-making processes. Second, the deployment of military and security forces created a repressive atmosphere that undermined civil liberties and human rights in Northern Ireland. Third, many of Northern Ireland Catholic and Protestant continue to live mostly separate lives. There are nearly 100 barriers to peace walls in Belfast. However, there are two positive outcomes. All of this coercion applied by the British Army and the police of the Northern Ireland play a significant role in coercing terrorists and bringing them to dialogue. According to Edwards A. Moreover, coercion was one of the points that allowed the peace agreement. With this, new institutions arose to strengthen democracy: the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive and the North-South Ministerial Council. Finally, our third case, the 2016 coup d'etat attempt posed similar challenges to democracy in Turkey. President Erdogan had made Turkey more Islamic with a crackdown on his opponents and Syrian and Kurdish people. One faction of the Turkish army's force, the Council for Peace at Home, who advocated a more secular and inclusive stance, opposed Erdogan and tried to carry out a coup on 15 July 2016. In the case of the 2016 coup d'etat in Turkey, has coercion been effective in promoting peace and democracy? The speech given by the Council on the night of the coup was emphasizing not only the change of power but how democratic values could be restored using the conflict. They accused Erdogan of using coercive forces wrongfully and claimed that a military regime could restore democracy. At the beginning, the violence that occurred in Turkey was structural and non-visible across ethnic and cultural dimensions. But later on, the coercive Erdogan government oppression over political opponents and minority groups eventually resulted in visible violence at the midnight of the 15th of July 2016. To control the situation, Erdogan did the following. First, he challenged the media by putting his version of events on national television and using practical media skills by giving interviews in real time. Second, Erdogan divided the army rivals who were opposing to his regime. And finally, the most effective tool used by him was the call to international allies like the NATO and the European Union, which supported Erdogan's regime. The strategic partners across the globe allied with him. Many of the domestic partners also supported him and executed the rival groups. In this way, the conversion was a very effective strategy to maintain peace and order, as well as to reduce the conflict within the country to protect democratic values. It had a positive implication if we consider that the constitutional process was largely maintained and supported by people within Turkey. Unfortunately, on the other hand, many people were executed. The polarization has increased since 2016 and its democratic index has been falling since. As a reflection of the three cases, we can say that in all the three countries, coercion by governments has involved human rights violations. Coercion has been a tactic to undermine the Zapatistas, and it was a strategy to undermine the RA, as well as opposition groups and minorities in Turkey. Democratic participation processes were implemented in three countries, but differ in the set of actors. And finally, it is worth to ask, it is possible to talk about peace? In the case of Northern Ireland, sectarianism has not been resolved, and in Mexico, the struggle between the Zapatistas and the government continues. The peace was ensured and restored to some extent in Turkey, but at the cost of the deteriorated peace process and marginalization of various identities.